I was enjoying my cousin's beautiful outdoor wedding reception when a wealthy drunk guest drenched me in red wine and called me pathetic. But when my husband Jake saw me standing there humiliated and soaked, something terrifying flashed in his eyes. What he did next left everyone at the wedding speechless. If you think you know what happens when someone messes with the wrong person's wife, think again. This outdoor wedding turned into absolute chaos in seconds. Subscribe now and hit that bell because this shocking revelation will blow your mind. You know that feeling when you're getting ready for something special and everything just feels perfect? That's exactly how I felt that Saturday morning as I slipped into my simple white summer dress. My cousin Lucy was finally marrying her college sweetheart Tom, and I couldn't have been happier for her. The wedding was being held at this gorgeous luxury resort about an hour outside the city, and from what Lucy had told me, Tom's family had really gone all out for this celebration. Jake was rushing around our small apartment, trying to find his good tie, while simultaneously checking emails on his phone. That's my husband for you, always juggling 10 different things at once. He works in business consulting, which means he's constantly traveling and dealing with what he calls urgent client situations. Honestly, sometimes I feel like I barely see him, but when I do, he makes every moment count. "Kristen, have you seen my silver cufflinks?" he called from the bedroom, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. Jake always gets stressed when he has to dress up for formal events. He's more comfortable in his regular work clothes than fancy suits. "Check the jewelry box on my dresser," I called back while touching up my lipstick in the bathroom mirror. I kept my makeup simple, just some mascara, a touch of blush, and a soft pink lip color. I've never been one for dramatic looks, especially not at someone else's wedding. The last thing I wanted was to draw attention away from Lucy on her special day. When we finally made it to the resort, I was absolutely breathless. The venue was like something out of a fairy tale, rolling green lawns, perfectly manicured gardens, and this stunning outdoor pavilion where the ceremony would take place. White fabric draped elegantly between tall oak trees, and thousands of tiny fairy lights were already twinkling even in the afternoon sunlight. Lucy had chosen soft pink and cream flowers everywhere, and the whole setting felt magical and romantic. "Wow!" Jake whistled softly as we walked through the main entrance. "Tom's family really didn't hold back, did they?" He squeezed my hand gently, and I noticed him looking around with what seemed like appreciation for all the details. The ceremony itself was absolutely beautiful. Lucy looked radiant in her flowing gown as she walked down the petal-scattered aisle, and Tom's face when he saw her was just priceless. I found myself getting teary-eyed during their vows, especially when Lucy promised to love Tom through every adventure life brings us. There's something about weddings that just makes you believe in love all over again, you know? But just as the reception was getting started, Jake's phone buzzed with what he said was an emergency call from his biggest client. His face immediately shifted to that serious business mode expression I knew so well. "I'm really sorry, sweetheart," he said, pulling me aside near the elegant outdoor bar setup. "This client is having some kind of crisis, and they specifically requested me. I should be back in a couple of hours, definitely before dinner is served." He kissed my forehead gently. "Will you be okay on your own for a while?" I nodded and smiled, even though I felt a little disappointed. This always seemed to happen at social events. Jake would get pulled away by work, leaving me to navigate conversations with people I barely knew. But I understood. His job was demanding, and I'd learned to be independent at these kinds of gatherings. "Go handle your emergency," I said, straightening his tie affectionately. "I'll just enjoy the party and catch up with family. Lucy will keep me busy anyway." After Jake left, I made my way back to the reception area, which was now in full swing. The live jazz band was playing softly, while guests mingled around cocktail tables scattered across the beautifully lit garden. Waiters in crisp white shirts carried trays of champagne and elegant appetizers, and everything felt sophisticated and joyful. I spent some time chatting with relatives I hadn't seen in years, dancing with my elderly uncle who insisted on showing off his moves from the 1960s, and watching Lucy and Tom beam with happiness as they greeted their guests. The outdoor setting was absolutely perfect. There was something about being under the open sky with all those twinkling lights that made everything feel more intimate and special. As the evening progressed, I found myself standing alone at the bar, ordering what the bartender recommended as their signature cocktail. I was people-watching and enjoying the peaceful moment when I noticed someone approaching from my peripheral vision. "Excuse me," came a voice that immediately made me uncomfortable. I turned to see a man in an expensive-looking charcoal gray suit, probably in his 50s, with perfectly styled hair and a gold watch that caught the light. Everything about him screamed wealth, but there was something in his eyes that set me on edge. "Yes?" I replied politely, hoping this would just be a brief, friendly interaction. "I couldn't help but notice you standing here alone," he said, moving closer than felt appropriate. His breath smelled like he'd been drinking heavily. "You seem a bit out of place at such an elegant affair." The way he said "elegant" made it sound like he didn't think I belonged here. I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "I'm here for the bride. She's my cousin." I attempted to move away from the bar, but he stepped slightly to block my path. "Ah, family obligation," he said with a condescending laugh. "I figured as much. Your dress is charming, very simple. I'm guessing you don't usually attend events quite this upscale." His eyes swept over me in a way that made my skin crawl. The comment about my dress stung because I'd actually worried about exactly that, whether I'd look too plain compared to the other guests. Many of the women here were wearing what were obviously designer gowns, dripping in jewelry that probably cost more than my monthly salary, but I'd chosen my white dress because it was elegant and appropriate, even if it wasn't expensive. "I think I'll go find my cousin," I said firmly, trying to step around him toward the dance floor, where I could see Lucy laughing with a group of her friends. "Oh, don't rush off," he said, his voice taking on an even more unpleasant tone. "I was just making conversation." Though I have to say, it's interesting how some people manage to find their way into exclusive venues like this. Social climbing is quite an art form these days. My stomach dropped. Was he really suggesting that I didn't belong here? That I was somehow using Lucy's wedding to gain access to wealthy people? The accusation was so ridiculous and hurtful that for a moment I couldn't even respond. "I don't know what you're implying," I said, my voice starting to shake with a combination of anger and embarrassment, "but I think this conversation is over." I tried once more to walk away, but this time he actually reached out and grabbed my arm. "Don't get defensive," he said with a nasty smile. "I'm just calling it like I see it. Girls like you, with your simple dresses and wide-eyed looks, you think you can catch yourself a rich husband at events like this. It's actually quite pathetic when you think about it." I could feel other guests starting to stare at us, and my face was burning with humiliation. This man was publicly embarrassing me at my cousin's wedding, and I felt completely helpless to make it stop. Lucy was too far away to notice what was happening, and most of the other guests were strangers to me. "Please let go of my arm," I said as firmly as I could manage, but my voice came out smaller than I intended. Instead of releasing me, his grip tightened. "The truth hurts, doesn't it? You probably told your little husband some sob story about needing a new dress for your cousin's fancy wedding. Did he buy that sad story? Or maybe you're here trolling for someone with deeper pockets?" The cruelty in his words was like a physical blow. Here I was, just trying to celebrate my cousin's happiness, and this horrible man was treating me like I was some kind of gold-digging opportunist. Tears started to blur my vision, but I was determined not to let him see me cry. "You don't know anything about me or my marriage," I managed to say, finally jerking my arm free from his grasp. "Oh, I know plenty." He laughed coldly. "I can spot your type from across the room. Cheap dress, no real jewelry, here alone because your husband probably couldn't afford the time off work to accompany you to such an expensive event. Am I getting warm?" That's when he reached over to the nearest waiter's tray and grabbed a full glass of red wine. The liquid was deep crimson, almost black in the garden lighting, and I saw his intention in his eyes a split second before he acted. "Here's what I think of social climbers," he snarled, and before I could move or react, he threw the entire contents of the glass directly into my face. The wine hit me like a cold shock, immediately soaking into my hair and streaming down my face and neck. I gasped as the liquid ran into my eyes, stinging and blurring my vision. I could feel it seeping into the fabric of my white dress, staining it deep red, ruining it completely. The smell of alcohol filled my nostrils, and I stood there frozen, dripping and humiliated. The entire outdoor reception fell silent. The jazz band stopped playing mid-song, conversations died away, and I could feel hundreds of eyes on me. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the perfectly manicured ground and never be seen again. Wine continued to drip from my hair onto the grass at my feet, and I raised my hands to try to wipe it from my face. "Now you look like what you really are," the man said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "A pathetic nobody who doesn't belong here." I stood there, wine-soaked and shaking, unable to find words or figure out what to do next. This was supposed to be Lucy's perfect day, and now I was the center of a horrible scene that would probably be talked about for years. I could hear people whispering, phones probably already taking pictures, and I felt smaller than I'd ever felt in my entire life. That's when I heard footsteps approaching rapidly across the grass, and something in the sound made me look up through my wine-blurred vision. Jake was striding through the crowd of wedding guests, still in his business suit, but something about his entire demeanor had changed completely. His face was a mask I'd never seen before, cold, controlled, but with something absolutely terrifying burning in his eyes. He wasn't rushing or shouting, but there was something in his measured approach that made people automatically step out of his way. The silence that had fallen over the reception somehow became even deeper and more tense. "Kristen," he said softly when he reached me, his voice gentle, but with an underlying edge that made me shiver. He didn't touch me yet, just looked at my wine-stained dress and tear-streaked face, taking in every detail of what had happened. When his gaze shifted to the drunk man who was still standing there with an empty wine glass in his hand, something flickered across Jake's features that was honestly frightening. "Is this the man who threw wine at my wife?" Jake asked, still in that deceptively quiet voice. The drunk businessman, apparently not reading the dangerous energy radiating from my husband, actually laughed. "Your wife? Oh, this is rich. Let me guess. You're the poor sucker she married while trolling for someone better at events like this?" He looked Jake up and down dismissively. "Cheap suit, probably some middle management nobody. She can definitely do better if she plays her cards right." I watched Jake's hands slowly curl into fists at his sides, and I realized I was seeing a side of my husband I'd never witnessed before. This wasn't the gentle, slightly scattered man who couldn't find his cufflinks this morning. This was someone else entirely. "I think you should apologize to my wife," Jake said, taking one step closer to the man. "Right now." "Apologize?" The drunk man burst into mocking laughter. "For what, telling the truth? Your little gold-digger wife got exactly what she deserved. Maybe next time she'll think twice before crashing parties she doesn't belong at." What happened next occurred so fast that I barely processed it. Jake's fist connected with the man's jaw with a sound that cracked across the entire reception like a gunshot. The force of the blow sent the man stumbling backward, where he crashed directly into the elegant three-tiered wedding cake table. The beautiful cake, Lucy's gorgeous masterpiece with delicate sugar flowers, toppled and exploded across the grass. The man went down hard, hitting the ground with the demolished cake covering his expensive suit. White frosting and pink flowers scattered everywhere around him. Wedding guests screamed. Someone's champagne glass shattered on the stone patio. Lucy gasped so loudly I could hear her from across the garden. The peaceful, elegant reception had erupted into complete chaos in the span of 3 seconds. The man was on his back in the ruined cake, his lip bleeding, looking stunned and terrified for the first time all evening. Jake stood over him, breathing hard, his knuckles bloody but his expression still that same cold, controlled mask. "Security!" someone shouted, and I saw several men in black suits running toward us across the garden. But as they got closer, something strange happened. Instead of restraining Jake, they stopped short, and one of them spoke into a radio device. "Mr. Harrison is here," I heard him say clearly. "Yes, sir, Mr. Harrison." Mr. Harrison? Why were they calling Jake Mr. Harrison? His last name was Johnson. We were Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. I stared at my husband in complete confusion, still dripping wine and trying to process what was happening. That's when the resort manager came running over, a woman in an impeccable business suit who looked absolutely panicked. But instead of addressing the chaos or the destroyed cake or the bleeding man on the ground, she went directly to Jake. "Mr. Harrison, sir," she said breathlessly, "we had no idea you were attending this event personally. If we had known, we would have provided additional security coverage. This never should have happened on our property. We are so incredibly sorry." The entire reception area had gone dead silent again. Every single wedding guest was staring at this exchange, trying to understand what they were witnessing. I saw Lucy pushing through the crowd toward us, her wedding dress trailing behind her, confusion written all over her face. "I wasn't here in a professional capacity, Margaret," Jake said to the manager, his voice returning to something more normal but still carrying an authority I'd never heard before. "I was simply attending my wife's cousin's wedding as a guest. But when someone assaults my wife on one of my properties, it becomes my business very quickly." One of his properties? I felt like the ground was shifting under my feet. What was Jake talking about? The manager nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. We'll handle this situation immediately. Should I have this individual removed from the premises permanently?" Jake looked down at the man who was now trying to sit up in the destroyed cake, frosting in his hair and blood on his chin. "I think that would be appropriate. Make sure he understands that he's banned from all Harrison Resort properties indefinitely." "And Margaret?" He paused, his voice dropping to that dangerous, quiet tone again. "Make sure word gets out about why he's been banned. I want everyone to know what happens when someone mistreats my wife." Harrison Resort properties? My head was spinning as pieces of impossible information tried to fit together in my brain. The Harrison Resort chain was one of the most exclusive and expensive hotel groups in the country. They owned luxury properties in every major city, plus vacation destinations like this one. But that would mean... "Jake?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the shocked murmurs of the wedding guests. "What's happening? What are they talking about?" He turned to me then, and his expression immediately softened back into the man I knew. He reached out gently to touch my wine-stained cheek, his bloody knuckles a stark reminder of what had just occurred. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, sweetheart," he said quietly. "I never wanted you to be put in a situation like this. I've been trying so hard to protect you from all of this." He gestured vaguely at the chaos around us, the security guards, the manager waiting for instructions. "Protect me from what?" I asked, though part of me was beginning to understand something huge was being revealed. Jake took a deep breath, glancing around at all the staring faces before focusing back on me. "My name isn't Jake Johnson, Kristen. It's Jake Harrison. I own this resort and about 30 others like it across the country. I've been watching you through our security system since you arrived, making sure you were safe while I dealt with that business emergency. When I saw what this man did to you..." His jaw tightened again. "Nobody hurts my wife." Nobody. The wedding reception full of guests was completely silent, hanging on every word of this impossible revelation. I could see phones being raised to record what was happening, people whispering frantically to each other, Lucy standing frozen in her wedding dress with her mouth open in shock. You're Jake Harrison," I stammered. "The billionaire Jake Harrison?" It felt ridiculous saying it, but the evidence was all around me. The way the staff treated him, the authority in his voice, the casual mention of owning multiple luxury resorts. "I wanted to tell you so many times," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "but I fell in love with how you treated me like just a regular person. Do you know how rare that is? Most people, when they find out about the money, they change. They see dollar signs instead of me. You married Jake, the business consultant who travels too much and can never find his cufflinks. You loved me for who I am, not what I own." I looked around at the destroyed cake, The man being helped to his feet by security guards, the hundreds of wedding guests watching our private moment become public, and I felt completely overwhelmed. My husband, the man who worried about affording nice restaurants, who lived with me in a modest apartment, who I thought worked in middle management, was one of the wealthiest men in the country. "The business trips," I said slowly. "Board meetings, property acquisitions, resort openings," he confirmed. I kept it compartmentalized. Jake Harrison the businessman and Jake Johnson the husband who just wants to come home to his wife and forget about the rest of it. The man who had thrown wine at me was now standing unsteadily, supported by 2 security guards, cake frosting still smeared across his expensive suit. When he looked at Jake, his face had gone completely white with what I realized was terror. "Mr. Harrison," he said, his voice shaking, I had no idea. If I had known who she was." "If you had known who she was?" Jake's voice turned dangerous again. "You mean you would have treated my wife with respect only if you knew she was married to someone wealthy? That's exactly the kind of thinking that disgusts me." He stepped closer to the man. "My wife deserves respect because she's a human being, not because of who she's married to." The man was nodding frantically, blood from his split lip mixing with white frosting. "Yes, of course, you're absolutely right. I sincerely apologize, Mrs. Harrison. I was completely out of line. I stood there, still covered in red wine, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 10 minutes. My quiet life had just exploded into something I couldn't have imagined, and I honestly didn't know how to feel about any of it." Jake turned back to me, ignoring everyone else. "We should get you cleaned up and get you a new dress. And then, if you're willing, I think we owe Lucy and Tom a replacement wedding cake." He smiled tentatively. "I hear the resort's pastry chef is pretty talented." As security escorted the wine-throwing man away from the reception and the resort manager began coordinating cleanup of the destroyed cake, I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and tried to see Jake Harrison instead of Jake Johnson. But you know what? Underneath the shocking revelation and the hidden wealth and the power I'd never suspected, he was still the man who'd rushed back from a business meeting because someone had hurt me. He was still the person who'd spent 3 years making me feel loved and cherished for exactly who I was. The only difference was that now I understood why he'd always seemed so confident that everything would work out okay, and why he never worried about money the way I sometimes did. "Kristen?" Jake said softly, uncertainty creeping into his voice for the first time. "Are you angry with me for keeping this secret?" I looked around at the wedding reception that had turned into something resembling a movie scene, at my cousin Lucy who was still staring at us in amazement, at the wine stains covering my white dress, and at my husband who apparently owned the ground we were standing on. And then I started to laugh. Not hysterical laughter, but genuine amusement at the absolute absurdity of everything that had just happened. "Jake Harrison," I said, shaking my head and wiping wine from my face. "My husband is Jake Harrison, and I found out because some drunk jerk threw wine at me at a wedding." I looked at him with a mixture of love, exasperation, and amazement. We are definitely going to have a very long conversation about this later. But right now, I think we owe Lucy and Tom a new cake. Jake's relieved smile was exactly the same as it had always been, billionaire or not. And as the resort staff sprang into action to salvage the reception, I realized that some things, the important things, hadn't changed at all. Did you see that punch coming? Jake's protective instincts just exploded in front of an entire wedding. Can you imagine discovering your husband is secretly this powerful? Drop a comment if you think that drunk guest deserved what he got. If this dramatic twist left you shook, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories that will leave you on the edge of your seat.